a navigator lays down in the front of the vaca, spreading his hands, feeling the wood beneath him. He hears the other men laughing softly at their own jokes as they sit, waiting somewhere behind. But he closes his eyes and lets his mind slip. Every swell, every creak, every jostle tells a story. A story of the grand movement of the water as it connects the islands and carries the world with it. He remembers the voice of his father, teaching him with sticks that showed the ocean's ways. At long last he stands up smiling and signals to the men, for he knows exactly where to go. Most of us on Earth spend almost all our lives on the land. We walk or drive from place to place, build homes, hike mountains. Our maps reflect this. We draw maps for the land, and our eyes are continually drawn to those rich features, diverse terrain. We show this with colors, borders, names. For most of us, the Earth, for all practical purposes, is the land. After all, we call Earth, Earth, don't we? Yet we know that the real Earth is not mostly dry land. The surface is, of course, mainly water. On our maps, the water is almost always just a featureless blue boundary between the important bits of land, or it's a blank nothingness that separates and defines the earthy parts. Our eyes just pass over the big waters, and we have no issue splitting the world map right down the middle of the largest ocean because, well, there's nothing really important there, right? But not all cultures think of water or oceans as stuff that's just in between the land. For ocean-going peoples, for sea people, the water is the important part. The land still matters, of course. It's where you raise animals, build shelter, grow crops. But for such people, maps could never show the ocean as a featureless empty space, because the ocean is the connective tissue, the highway, the source of life. Perhaps the greatest sea people culture in human history existed and still exists in what we refer to today as Oceania, the massive collection of islands and waters in the South Pacific. The people who explored and navigated these waters thousands of years ago, and who still live there today, are known by many names, and we may refer to different groups as Austronesians, Micronesians, Maori, or Polynesians. In this video, we're going to look at one example of how some of these ocean-going people mapped the watery world that was so important to them. The stick chart, a type of map created traditionally by people of what are today called the Marshall Islands, exhibits an incredible intimacy and understanding of the ocean. These charts are made of palm ribs, coral fibers, shells, and pebbles, and treat the ocean as the living thing that it is, not just a featureless plain. The charts allow us a window into a culture that puts awareness of water first and foremost, and passes such knowledge down over generations. Through these charts, we can glimpse something of the astounding ways that sea people in this part of the world were able to navigate and explore the South Pacific in expert fashion many thousands of years ago. Let's stop for a moment and just appreciate the size of this part of the world, the South Pacific. We split the Pacific down the middle in most maps, but that just disguises how enormous it really is. You could fit all the continents on Earth into the Pacific and still have room left over for another North America. What we call the Polynesian Triangle, illustrated here, is just huge. Look at it over other parts of Earth. And the islands? Well, they're numerous, but very small. The words that represent them on maps are usually way bigger than the islands themselves. Yet, using tools like the stick charts, the people of Oceania visited every island in the South Pacific and probably even beyond to South America. Now, I can't just talk about stick charts if I'm going to talk about Oceania's history of expert navigation. They are, after all, just one of a much wider array of tools. While we don't know for certain exactly how the ancient ocean goers navigated, we do know a few techniques and technologies that were in play. All of these, I think, should be considered as part of a non-written mapping system that Oceania's explorers were experts at using. So let's look at these navigation tools and methods in general a little bit, and we'll come back to the stick charts afterwards. Above all, we have to think of the stars. Navigators and their crews knew the stars and constellations in extraordinary detail. Micronesia, where the Marshall Islands are located, practiced celestial navigation well into the 20th century, and some still do today. One of the best sources for learning about how stars were used for navigation comes through the star compass, popularized by Nainoa Thompson. Thompson, a Hawaiian navigator, learned many traditional methods from Micronesians, particularly from Papa Mau Piailug, a master navigator who is famous for his incredible wayfinding feats and his enormous role in cultural revival across the Pacific. Piailug served as the navigator on the first journey of the Hokulea in 1976, amazing the world by navigating from Hawaii to Tahiti using purely traditional methods, kickstarting today's numerous voyaging societies. If you're interested in this subject, I'd recommend that you learn more about Mau Piailug. He is an outstanding figure in modern Pacific history. In any case, Piailug and Thompson show us that the star compass is a very reliable ancient technique handed down over thousands of years, and it played a crucial role in the mental maps the people of Oceania used and still use to explore and navigate. Simply put, the star compass is a compass that uses stars instead of a magnet. Thompson describes it as follows in the clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk.
Because you can find the star in the sky, it doesn't tell you anything about navigation. You need to know primarily where it rises and sets.
Okay.
And so there is this mental construct called the star compass.
Star compass, I like that. Uh-huh.
It's as if you're a satellite looking down at the ocean's horizon, and there's a canoe in the center of this big circle. And in the circle is that circle, that edge.
So I got the circle. All right, here we go.
And it's divided into 32 star houses. Mm-hmm. Maybe north is here, south is here, east is here, west is there. Mm-hmm. And there's 7 star houses in each quadrant.
Okay, uh-huh.
And so let's say this is the eastern horizon. So you can take a star and identify it, but you need to know what star house it is. Like Mintaka in Orion's belt, rises due east, comes across the sky and sets due west, or any of the stars.
Right, okay. So you've split the perimeter, the horizon, into these places.
If you can identify the star, and if you know what star house it rises in, you can hold direction.
So Thompson is describing how, with deep knowledge of each star and what area of the horizon it rises and sets, one can navigate across long distances. But stars aren't always visible, so sailors used a whole plethora of other methods too. The shapes of clouds as they cross the sea and move over islands, patterns of bird migrations, taste of ocean, temperature of ocean, the swells, the currents, all of these were used together to create the possibility of reliable journeys across enormous distances. Bear in mind that none of this was written down either. Oral traditions handed these down instead. While spoken words aren't something that you can use like a tool, we shouldn't underestimate the power of memorization and the mental encyclopedias that oceanic navigators carried around with them. The cultures of Oceania have many complex and heroic traveling tales that tell of the movement of great sailors and great heroes between different islands. For example, we have the story of Kupe, the Maori navigator. Other stories even catalog specifically how to journey around from island to island, giving a kind of itinerary. These traditions end up serving many purposes, whether entertainment, cultural history, or navigational aid. Through oral tradition, the many years of knowledge move across the ocean and through its people. And all of this brings us back to these little charts, these maps made of coconut fibers and bent palm ribs. In the constellation of tools that we've gone over, what role do they play? What do they represent? What are they mapping when it comes to the ocean? Well, for the first part, we know these stick charts weren't actually being brought out to sea to be consulted like we would consult a map while we drive around. These were, instead, some of the first parts of the construction of a mental awareness, handed down usually from father to son. Boys would be taken out onto ships, would lie down and feel all the moving water, learning its ways and developing an intuition under the eye of a master navigator. The stick charts would help to develop the awareness of how swells, currents, waves, and winds intersect both in general and also around specific island chains. Now, for those of us who live on land, we've heard of swells and currents, but they aren't necessarily very familiar. Swells, to put it briefly, are just waves, but more specifically, swells are waves amplified and strengthened by consistent or intense wind in a specific direction. There are many winds across the Pacific, but certain trade winds, such as those from the northeast, can be present all year round and create consistent swell directions and sizes. But other winds might only be present sometimes and create more inconsistent swells, but still noticeable. These swells can be disrupted by islands, but also refracted and reflected by undersea slopes and shores just beneath the surface of the water, and can form complex but regular patterns, especially around chains of islands. Now, currents are probably more familiar to most landfolk, yet they're also very complex, describing the movement of sections of water, either surface or deep, and can be the result of many things: gravity, the wind, temperature differences, and more. But at the core, currents describe not so much the surface waves as the water circulating more broadly around the ocean. The curving and straight lines in the charts usually represent swells and currents. Little shells, representing islands, are visible as well. Swells tend to be the curved lines and currents the straight. You can imagine following along with one of the current lines, sailing between islands, identifying your position by paying attention to the swells you meet along the way. The sensitivity to the ocean's movements to do such a thing is incredible, and the story from the beginning of this video of a navigator lying down and feeling the water in the ship is one way that this was done. For the stick charts, it would actually take the creator of each chart to be able to tell us specifically which sticks are currents, which are swells, and which are structural parts of the chart. And while some charts are just theoretical, describing the nature of ocean phenomena, others are meant to be a guide to specific parts of the ocean. And as part of a wider tradition, these charts aren't meant to be readable to just anyone, instead handed down over generations. Obviously, the land itself is not a big feature in these charts. The size of the islands are irrelevant. Their particular features, their names, or people that live there, we're assumed to know whatever we need to know about the island. The water is what matters. So from these charts, we can get a picture of how navigators visualize these currents and swells. The ribs and lines echo out and intersect, forming complex patterns shaped by the land. Now, we might be tempted to see these maps as a kind of onboard GPS system, where you could find yourself and figure out how far away an island is. But it's very unlikely that these charts were ever meant to represent distance in the way that we today think about maps when we look at Google, for instance. Geometrical distance is not actually the most helpful concept when you're sailing on vast waters. For example, an island that is readily in sight might take surprisingly long to reach if a strong current lies in the way, while an island far away might be quite close in practical terms if it's easy to sail to. So while the stick charts are showing how to get from one place to another, they aren't really about measuring distances in our usual terms. So when we try to stretch these stick charts to match our satellite maps, they end up somewhat distorted. These images, put together by an awesome Reddit user, show some examples of this. Some stick charts do seem to more tightly match modern distances and currents, but others require a lot of distortion in order to fit onto our maps. This isn't, I think, because some are more accurate than others. They vary because these stick charts aren't trying to be accurate in the same way that a satellite map is trying to be accurate. They're just not in the same conceptual world as satellite maps. These charts describe dynamic, moving water, not static land or distances between points. They describe the real world that you experience while you're sailing a ship, which is not the same world as a photograph of the ocean from above. Asking stick charts to be Google Maps is interesting for us, but it doesn't tell us much about the stick charts themselves. Accuracy for a stick chart isn't about being a picture from overhead. It's about whether or not the chart helps a navigator get a cruise somewhere on a vast, dangerous ocean. I find this way of thinking, the break with the conceptual universe of our maps that we take for granted, one of the most fascinating parts of stick charts. We can easily assume that our ways of thinking about space and Earth are natural, since we've all used satellite maps our entire lives. But there's nothing inherently normal about seeing the world from overhead, focusing on land only, or measuring distances the way we do, with ideas of meters and miles. In some ways, seeing things from overhead is a really strange way to approach the Earth, and miles don't really describe how it feels to go from one place to another on a real world with mountains and rivers in the way. Stick charts are a great window into a world that not only sees water first, but also sees space itself differently than we do. Nowadays, stick charts are more often found as cultural pieces in the revitalization of oceanic cultures rather than literal teaching tools. That being said, traditional navigation methods are stronger today than they have been in the past 100 years at least, in part due to the sharing and experimentation by people like Papa Mao and Nainoa Thompson. You can also find these charts in museums around the world. Today, we do have maps that centralize water, bathymetry maps, maps of currents and tides, maps where we're looking at the ocean and the land is secondary. I think that these maps would be understandable to oceanic navigators, even though they're curious things to most of us. And indeed, most of us landfolk rarely ever see those ocean-centered maps at all. So stick charts, having fulfilled their original role as teachers, now encourage those of us who live in a world of dirt and earth to see the ocean as something more than just in the way or other than land. The water is the center. The water is where the action is. The water connects, ties together, and sustains us. The stick charts know this, just as the people of Oceania know this, and always have.